the 1619 project, you've heard me talk about it. You've heard there's some good information there, but you've heard my criticisms about it. And it's important for us to understand that much of what we've been told about Virginia's 1619 first Africans is wrong. Okay. Much of what we've been told about Virginia's 1619 first Africans is wrong. There's a good article from VirginiaMercury.com from August 11th, 2019 that deals with this. And in 1619, codified slave laws didn't exist in any of the 13 colonies. And a lot of people are so shocked when they hear this. The whole way that slavery evolved in this country and even the way race evolved in this country is different than the way we actually think it evolved. Okay. I mean, that gets also in the Bacon's Rebellion, 1675, 1676, in the colony of Virginia, what happens after Bacon's Rebellion and the introduction of the term white in the colony of Virginia around 1681 to break up the alliance between enslaved Africans, free African Americans, poor whites, white indentured servants, things of this nature. That all comes to a head in Bacon's Rebellion, where you have this rebellion of about 500 people of different races, different statuses, some enslaved Africans, some white indentured servants, etc. And they burned down the town of Jamestown, Virginia in 1676 because they were all being exploited on the tobacco plantations in Virginia. And they realized that they had a common enemy. They were being exploited by the ruling elite. Okay, this is Bacon's Rebellion. Then you go to 1705 and the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705, which is going to become a model, and other colonies are going to adopt these slave codes. And the Virginia Slave Codes of 1705 make a distinction between Negroes and Moors. So you get into this, you start dealing with a deep understanding of history, and you start seeing how all this evolves, and nationalities and status, and start seeing how all of this evolves. Okay. So the way this history actually happens is much different than the way we think it happens. So the way we talk, I like this type of information, like on the broadcast. Okay, continue here. And we have the link here in the thread of the broadcast where you can register for this 12-week online course. It's on sale, $80, regularly $130. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they teach you in school. All right, now, Africans were in South Carolina in 1526, 93 years before Virginia. Okay, now this is not talked about a lot. We focus on 1619, and I have to tell people, they say we first came to these shores 1619. No, we were here thousands of years before that. But even if you just look during the transatlantic slave trade, the Spanish were taking Africans into the territory we call South Carolina in 1526. Okay, now this is something we deal with all this in the class because we go through and look at this history chronologically. So these are all slides from the course that I teach, that I put together. I'm a historian, been studying history 32 years. I put together this curriculum as well as the second class that I teach, which is from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1800 to 1968, which goes through and goes deep into looking at that 168-year period of history and analyzing what happened to us also after slavery ended. Okay, now before 1619, there was 1526, the mystery of the first enslaved Africans in what became the United States. There's a good article from Washington Post, September 7th, 2019, September 7th, 2019, that deals with this history. 1526 is not talked about a lot. Okay. And you had those Africans, there's going to be an uprising. They're going to overthrow their oppressors and they're going to run away. And it's believed they went to live with Native Americans. So it was the Spanish tried to set up the settlement, but it was a failed settlement. Now, Spanish explorers brought 100 African slaves to a doomed settlement in South Carolina or Georgia. Within weeks, the subjugated revolted, then vanished. Maybe that's why they don't want us to know about 1526, because those Africans overthrew their oppressors. So maybe that's why that's not talked about a lot. But that's 93 years before Jamestown, Virginia. And then in 1513, Juan Ponce de Leon, the Spanish conquistador, comes into Florida, and he has an African with him named Juan Garrido. Juan Garrido was born in West Africa around 1480. And Juan Garrido is probably the first African we know of by name, in this land that we call the United States of America, or what Native Americans call Turtle Island. And Dr. David Imhotep talks about Turtle Island in the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence.
Wow, and we should say, we have a picture of the book too, and it's The First Americans Were Africans. And we were talking about Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, because I remember back in the 1980s, my dad took me to hear him. He came here to Cincinnati, and his book was They Came Before Columbus, and he talked about how Africans were here. He had a lot of, great research information, and so it was just kind of eye-opening, but we haven't heard a lot about that recently. So tell us how you got involved here.
Well, I'm showing that Africans not only came before Columbus, they came before the Indians.
So you're going even farther back.
I'm going farther back, at least 56,000 years old.
Okay, now we've got a graphic up here about 130,000 years ago.
Yeah, well, they sailed over here. And when I lecture, people say, well, wait a minute, humans weren't sailing, let alone they weren't boating 130,000 years ago. And I beg to differ. Last year, New York Times quoted the BBC, and they wrote an article on how in Crete they have found a stone industry of stone tools going back to at least 130,000 years. And Crete has been an island in the middle of the Mediterranean for 5 million years. So they had to sail, and it was a continuous civilization, which means they were going back and forth. They knew how to navigate. So if they got to Crete 130,000 years ago, it's easy 70,000 years later that they could make it to the Americas at 56,000 years ago.
Right. That's really, now how did you even get back to this research? I mean, this is just, did you start by reading They Came Before Columbus, and then you expanded on that research?
Yes. You see, that was 36 years ago, Dr. Van Sertima's book came out, and this information is piled on for 36 years. So many different things, so many cutting-edge articles and things have been found since then.
Yeah, and what's the reaction you get when you talk about how Africans came here even before Native Americans?
People are amazed. They're shocked. They're shocked. First come shocks, and then they're smiling, and some frown, of course.
And then, and what about the school systems? Because, have we gotten this information to the educational system?
Not yet. The book has only been out for a month and a half.
And what kind of feedback are you getting, though, when you go around and talk about this? I mean, I'm assuming you're doing lectures around the country.
Yeah, well, I always bring my peer-reviewed articos.
Okay.
Because my thesis, which is the same as my title, The First Americans Were Africans, is backed up by 7, soon to be 8, peer-reviewed journal articles, which is the height of academia.
Wow. And so you've got credibility. I mean, people can see this research. What do you think? Do you think this is going to change history at all?
Well, for hundreds of years in Europe, people thought the world was flat, and it took a while for them to be able to say the world was round in order to go out there and navigate and see that it was indeed round. So it's going to take a little while for them to get around this, but it will happen.
And so what part of Africa were the Africans from who came to Brazil?
Well, the DNA, the Genome Project found that the earliest ones, the ones that they found in Tierra del Fuego, in the very tip of South America, in 1874, 1876, were the short Africans, the Khoisan, who spoke with clicks, like that. The Gods Must Be Crazy did a movie on that.
Yeah, I remember that, yeah.
Yes. So they have
about the Coca-Cola bottle that fell in, yeah.
Yes, they have the oldest DNA and the oldest language on the planet, and they were all over.
Oh, wow.
All over all 3 Americas, as well as Asia.
Well, have they done any DNA tests in Brazil to see that?
Yes, they have. The Genome Project went all around the world. There are 100,000 people participated.
Wow.
Taking DNA swabs.
And so first we know that it's possible to get over here by canoe, and second of all, the DNA from that group of Africans is in Brazil.
The most important thing, not to forget to ask me, well, I will tell you that, where do the Native Americans come from? Well, we've always been taught that they came across the Bering Straits from Asia. This is true, but they did not come until 3000 BC. There is no evidence of them coming before 3000 BC. So for 53,000 years, there were nothing but Africans in North, Central, and South America.
Wow.
When they come over 3000 BC, those two groups, the Africans and the Mongolians, get together, the Asians, get together, and their children are the Native Americans.
Wow.
This is why the Native Americans do not look Chinese. They are a little different than Chinese.
Right. Oh, that's, you know what, I mean, we need to learn. It makes a lot of sense, yes. Dr. Imhotep, and we need to learn our history.
Hotep, everybody. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network, host of the African History Network show. I'm a talk show host, researcher, lecturer, writer, and historian. Wanted to do a brief overview of my 12-week online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Join me live in class Saturday, July 29th, 2023, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at our online school for another exciting, informative session of my 12-week online course. You see me on Roland Martin Unfiltered, talking about this class. You see me on Faraji Muhammad's show, The Culture. You see me on the Tammy Mack Lake Show, as well on the Fox Soul TV network. And this is a 12-week online course. We deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. So you never look at history the same way again. So in this 12-week online course that I developed, and I put together the slideshow, the curriculum, I chose the content. We can't start studying our history in slavery, okay? Even when we study the transatlantic slave trade, which is important to study, we can't start in 1619. And there's a whole lot of talk about 1619 because of the 1619 project and the 400th year anniversary of August 20th, 1619, which we do deal with in the class, but we deal with thousands of years of history that leads up to 1619 as well. We can't start in 1619 in Virginia or in the 1440s when the Portuguese get involved in the transatlantic slave trade. We have to understand the history chronologically and deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who take the teachings from the Nile Valley region of Africa into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal, in 711 AD. And it's going to be these teachings that are going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. Okay, they bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. This course not only deals with the transatlantic slave trade, but deals with thousands of years of history that leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Now, August 20th, 2019 marked the 400th year anniversary of those 20 and odd Africans or 20 and odd Negroes who came into Point Comfort, which was really in Hampton, Virginia, as opposed to Jamestown, Virginia, on August 20th, 1619, on the White Lion pirate ship. And we go in depth and talk about what happened and deal with the fact that you had 350 Africans who were taken from Angola and they were on a slave ship called the San Juan Bautista. And the San Juan Bautista gets hijacked around Veracruz, Mexico, by two English pirate ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. Okay. And it's going to be the White Lion and the Treasurer. They come into Virginia in August of 1619, and those 29 Africans are going to be on the White Lion pirate ship, Lion, which was an English pirate ship. So the August 20th, 1619 marked the 400th year anniversary of those 29 Africans who came into Point Comfort on August 20th, 1619, in what would later become the colony of Virginia. Now, this was known as the year of return, as many African Americans were and continue to reconnect to Africa and travel to Ghana or other West African countries. When we discuss the transatlantic slave trade, we have to first understand that African people are the original people of North, Central, and South America and have been in the land that we call the United States of America, or some call Turtle Island, at least 51,700 years. And we use numerous sources in this class. We look at a timeline of history, the book references. There are 82 100 articles that we look at as well. We have video clips, PowerPoint presentation, etc. Now we see that the teaching of African history has come under attack, and probably unprecedented attack, in the last few years. We see in Florida, especially, the advanced placement African American studies class from the College Board. We see that being banned in the state of Florida. We saw protests take place around that. We see with the anti-critical race laws in the past 2 or 3 years, we see that impacting how Black History Month lessons are taught in schools. Axios.com had this article, New Rules Are Limiting How Teachers Can Teach Black History Month. We see stories about we see stories about lessons dealing with slavery gone wrong, like this article from USA Today, mock slave auctions, racist lessons, how U.S. history class often traumatizes, dehumanizes Black students. So we see different stories like this in the latest attack dealing with the teaching of African American history. Once again, comes out of Florida in the new social studies standards, and part of the new social studies standards appear to teach middle school students that at least some African Americans benefited from slavery because it taught them useful skills, okay, as this article from NBC News discusses. And we've dealt with this on the African History Network show as well. So in this class, we deal with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. So the 1619 project, even though there is some good information in it, a lot of what we know about those 20 and odd Africans is wrong. And one of the problems with the 1619 project is it does not deal with the African presence in the land we call the United States of America, going back at least 51,700 years ago, which we deal with in the class. And we discussed Dr. David Imhotep's book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence, as well as other sources. But this article here from VirginiaMercury.com, much of what we've been told about Virginia 1619 first Africans is wrong. This is from August 11th, 2019. Now, this is a historical marker that is at Fort Monroe in Virginia, and it notes the arrival of the first Africans in Virginia. And in 1619, codified slave laws don't exist in any of the 13 colonies. The first of the 13 colonies to have codified slave laws is Massachusetts in 1641. Okay, and these Africans are going to be put into a form of indentured servitude, and after about 3 to 5 years or so, they're going to be released from that. The Washington Post has a good article that deals with 93 years before 1619. It deals with the settlement that the Spanish tried to set up in the South Carolina, Georgia area. Before 1619, there was 1526. The mystery of the first enslaved Africans in what became the United States. Spanish explorers brought 100 African slaves to a doomed settlement in South Carolina.